The fact that he's introducing today the Aadhaar bill as a money bill in Parliament, which enables the benefits of the Aadhaar platform to be used for delivery of fertilizers, seeds, better education, better healthcare, through a technology platform, which is going to be guaranteed by an act of Parliament. And the fact that he is doing it as a money bill, recognizing the limits of what he can do in respect of non-money bill, which requires bipartisan support, I think combines sagacity and pragmatism. And therefore, I think on multitude of considerations, this budget in many ways will be remembered for a long time by economic historians to be a very positive contribution.
So let's get down to the basics. Mr. Gangopadhyay, if I may come to you, we've all been talking about fiscal deficit and how everybody is giving him a big thumbs up for meeting him, but the industry wanted him to loosen purse strings. He hasn't done that. He's chosen to err on the side of caution. He's going to maintain fiscal deficit at 3.5%, but he's also said in the same breath that there will be a committee that is going to review the FRBM Act. In some sense, is the signal from the budget that the government is a little confused about fisc?
Well, I don't think that the government is confused about the fisc. He had committed to keep the fiscal deficit down, so he's just maintained that commitment, and that's a good thing. It's good for the government to keep to its commitment. But he has also signaled that it's problematic to keep it fixed fixed at these low rates in India in the current scenario, and therefore he's allowed himself, through outsiders, through a committee, he has allowed himself the option, because I'm sure the committee will recommend exactly what he said he wants to do, which is to create a band around which the fiscal deficit can yo-yo back and forth. The question, I think, is where will the band be fixed? So, but that's a separate issue altogether. Now, I do want to stress something that was, I don't want to repeat anything that has been said before, and I agree with almost everything that has been said. But I want to highlight one thing that Mr. Sinha just said at the end, regarding the Aadhaar bill. You know, about 4 or 5 years ago, when we were working with the Delhi government to create the direct benefit transfer platform and mechanism, we were surprised to find that about 70% of all the schemes that the Delhi government along with the central government had, about 70% were pure cash transfer schemes. So I think it is a very good thing that this Aadhaar-based platform for distribution is being pushed, because this is something which is somehow not being recognized, but it will be a game changer in the years to come, regardless of how the economy does. So I do want to emphasize that.
Right. Mr. Munjal, you want to comment on that? Yes.
This is one of the places they will find headroom, by the way. And this has been tested now in 2 or 3 states. It was done in Chandigarh, it was done in Rajasthan. Wherever they tried, they started direct benefits. The benefit, the difference of the savings were from, I'm told, 30% to as much as 70% in some of the cases. So clearly there is a great
that perhaps
instrument for
hasn't got
improvement.
as much headroom and headline space as it would have. But I must ask you this question. I mean, you know, everybody's spoken about public spending and how everybody's giving it a big thumbs up. The government, of course, has done its bit. Capital expenditure is going to be at around the same levels as last year. The idea is to crowd in the private sector investment, but both you and I know that private sector is not investing, not for reasons in the budget, but because they are over-leveraged, there is very low demand. Does this budget do enough to crowd in the private sector investment? And do you believe they should have perhaps walked that extra mile to add a stimulus to industry that is actually under pressure?
So one, we had said we are okay with the slippage in the fisc, so to spend a little bit more. Because I'm not sure the government can directly do much except create that headroom, create demand. Because until there is demand, industry is not going to invest. At this moment, there is also a capacity overhang in the system because of low demand. They're kind of both tied in. And it appears from what they are doing that we will also see below-the-line investment. When I'm saying below the line, I mean not direct government investment, but from public sector enterprises, off-budget financing, the railways, the national highways, the airport authorities, the port authorities. So I think all of that put together has two big benefits. One, in the short term, when these projects are on, they create a large number of jobs. Second, once they're finished, they're a big multiplier on the economy in any case to create efficiency. And that is what we need for industry, is for the overall system to turn around in terms of consumption and demand. And I believe with the twin engines of the rural economy and the infrastructure, if they both start firing, that should turn around reasonably quickly. And that's when private sector will start investing.
Fair point indeed. Mr. Singh, do you believe the fiscal deficit could have been expanded and people would have forgiven him simply because demand is so low in India and corporates before the budget all said fiscal expansion can happen and it perhaps would have been a more prudent thing which is otherwise imprudent to do?
You know, Supriya, you can debate this issue of fiscal deficit till the cows come home because, frankly speaking, what are we talking about? If there had been a minor tweaking, it would have amounted to 0.2% of GDP, which would mean about 20, 30,000 crore more. I think that he has found the room for that in terms of what is called extra budgetary resources. He has found room for it in terms of allowing the strategic sales, in addition to disinvestment, to make a disinvestment target, which is more realistic, by hiving off assets of public sector companies in a manner which sounds more credible. He has taken a fairly realistic account of the likely outcome of non-tax revenue from spectrum, for instance. And by the way, I think a comment which was made by Sunil that the assumptions are quite optimistic. I mean, he has assumed only a nominal growth of GDP of 11% or so, which means a 7% in real terms and 4% inflation. I mean, economic survey itself points that the real GDP is likely to be much higher or somewhat higher than 7%, which means tax buoyancy should be higher. So I think that he has allowed enough room and accommodation in financing public investments in a significantly enhanced way, particularly on railways, on roads, on freeing up stranded assets and power. You asked the question, a very important question of private investment. Well, if private investment is weak, clearly we know from textbooks that's the time when public investment should provide the stimulus riding on the back of which private investment can grow. This is exactly what he has done. He has enhanced public investments, particularly in infrastructure and India's rural economy, for enabling private investment to kickstart on the back of a significantly enhanced public outlay. So I think that there are several virtuous circles, and to your short point, I would say, I think he has been prudent and wise in not tinkering with the fiscal consolidation target. Whatever is the target which he subsequently accepts on a roadmap, this has added to credibility, both national and international, and the stock markets have been given a big thumbs up. Also, finally, I think that he has allowed, by sticking to the fiscal consolidation target, he has allowed much greater flexibility to the governor of the Reserve Bank in recalibrating the monetary policy, keeping in account of the fact that he has stuck to fiscal deficits target, which enhances his flexibility.
That's a valid point indeed, and I was going to come to that next. The governor had almost thrown the ball in the government's court about fiscal deficit control and how that would create room for monetary policy. What is the room, do you think, that has been created for monetary policy loosening?
Before I answer that, I'd first take on from where Mr. Singh said. He was saying, why is the private sector not investing? The main reason was idle capacity in the industry. And by this process, rather than giving a kind of a QE, what he has done is stimulated demand through the rural and infra. 2,87,000 crores in one and 2,21,000 crores in another. I think the private sector today couldn't ask for more. So we in the private sector today don't ask for reduction of taxes. What we are looking for is the industry, the demand to be stimulated. And that, I think, he has done extremely well.
I will come to demand next, but I urge you to answer my question on monetary policy because I think I want to move on to the next subject after that.
Okay, I think as far as what the governor was asking for, he has got. The governor, now the ball is in his court, fairly and squarely. And I'm sure he will deliver. The question is not when, but how much.
Sudhir, he's already started. He already started yesterday.
with
he
the
started.
banks,
He
creating a
started.
headroom space of
He
about
started
35,000 crore rupees. So let's move on to the next part of this discussion, and the next part is, does the budget math add up? And like Mr. Singh was pointing out there, the nominal GDP growth is just at 11%, not too ambitious, but what about figures on spectrum proceeds or divestment? Mr. Gangopadhyay, if I may come to you on this, time and again, we've been talking about divestment. For the last 10 years, if you pick up the budgets, no divestment target has ever been met. What instills hope that 59,500 crore is going to be met this time around, and 98,000 crore rupees will be generated from spectrum?
You know, the thing is that we talk about divestment every year, and I don't understand why we do it. When the government goes out to divest these large amounts, it will never get the price that it wants to get. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is obvious. Right? So I don't understand why we create this hype about more divestment, more divestment. If the government wants to disinvest, then it must do so on a very, very, very committed path, right? Regardless of how much it is picking up. Because that is a much better signal to the market, right? Which now starts, maybe initially they will sell at low prices, but when they stick to their commitment, then the public will be interested in buying them, because then the disinvestment process is for real. Every now and then, because we have budgetary problems, disinvest 5% is not going to get a high price. So we have to give up that line of thinking when it comes to disinvestment. But one thing that the government has done, and that again, Mr. Singh just mentioned it, and I don't see it being emphasized, is allowing the public sector enterprises to get rid of unproductive assets. It is a huge efficiency factor. It will create a lot of resources with the public sector, right? Even without disinvestment. And certainly, if they can use this money more efficiently or give it back to the government, then it will be a very good thing. You know, you look out of one of the hotels in Delhi, and beside it, in prime place, is a railway land. And I don't understand what it is doing in the middle of Delhi. Now, that's a clear waste of resources, and it should be hived off. So I think this is a very good thing that has been done.
You want to comment on that? Yes, the government has the will, but many people thought this government will have the political courage to talk about privatization at a much greater scale. Are you disappointed that the third budget also doesn't talk about privatization as much? Yes, strategic sale, Niti Aayog is going to decide 20,000 crore rupees coming from that. But the way the Vajpayee government did privatization, we've come nowhere close to that.
So if I read what's written in there or what was said, he actually has mentioned the word strategic sale.
Yes.
Now, how they do it, only time will tell. But I suspect we will see some disinvestment. We will also see, as Shubhashis just said, some shedding of assets. And I believe we will also see strategic divestment of assets to individual promoters or groups of promoters or to private equity. I think we are likely to see all of these. If any large numbers that we met, and I want to reiterate the point that he just made, this has to be a consistent, ongoing process. It cannot be only when the markets are up. And I don't think the government, if it wants to reach any of these numbers, I don't think that's what they will do now.
Fair point indeed, and it can't just be revenue maximization. But I want to shift to the other bit, and that is, of course, the big elephant in the room that was being spoken about, the public sector banks. And Mr. Singh, I'm going to go across the panel on this. Let me start with you. Enough being done with 25,000 crore rupees? Because many people thought the problem is a lot bigger and the amount could have been higher. Notwithstanding what RBI has done yesterday, though.
Well, let me say this, that I think that, first of all, I think that the Reserve Bank and the Finance Ministry deserves a lot of credit in asking the banks to be transparent about their non-performing assets. We all know that for years, these non-performing assets had been hidden in multiple ways of accounting engineering we need not go into. So I think to some extent, the scale of the problem itself surfacing is a significant sign of the willingness to exercise various options on how to deal with it. Second, I think recapitalization cannot be a one-time act. It has to be a continuing process, because do not forget that a lot of these non-performing assets have been created because investments which they have been made have been stranded. They have been stranded in roads, they have been stranded in power, they have been stranded in some other investments. Whatever be the factors. One of the big efforts of the government is to free up these stranded assets. And if you look at the figures on what, for instance, Mr. Nitin Gadkari has been able to achieve in roads, where out of 88 of these stranded assets, the bulk of them are getting freed up. So that will also ease the extent to which the banks can reckon with the non-performing assets. Third, I think, is the provision of 25,000 crore adequate to deal with the total amount of recapitalization needed or not? Perhaps not. And this is, I think, that to some extent, if you read FM's statement, he has said he's providing 25,000 crores now. However, if the need arises, he's quite willing to add to this figure significantly. And then he goes on to say something about which I mentioned per se, that in respect of the recapitalization of IDBI Bank, government could consider even going below 50%, which is, in my view, a significant mindset change and a departure, recognizing the symbiotic relationship between ownership and governance.
But I must come in on that because both Jayant Sinha and Arun Jaitley, right after the budget, when we were interviewing him, very categorically said it's a one-off and we will not go below 50%, and which is where the political will to privatize public sector banks does arise, does it not?
No, of course it's a one-off, but let me say it's not an insignificant one-off, because I think that the very fact that the total amount of recapitalization which is needed over a period of time is being bared and laid out in a transparent fashion is a very, very significant change in moving towards a more transparent regime. And let me say that the fact that these